what you call ad-libbing, I guess. But anyway, this kind of history of the hymn rewind tonight, because we'd looked at this hymn once before, but quite frankly, this hymn has had a real impact on me, and maybe you, for all I know. Brother Dean has often mentioned to me and to you that God will use a person in spite of themselves. Have you ever heard him say that? And, you know, we tend to think, well, so-and-so out here did this or did that, or even one of these people of the Lord, these big revivals and all these things, say, well, they're just some spiritual superman, superwoman, or something like that. Problem is, that's just not accurate. And the Bible says God's strength is made perfect in weakness. In weakness. Now, that's impossible to understand, but there are many examples that we see of it. But the old hymn tonight is Sweet By and By. It's on page 41 if you want to turn there. I'm just going to kind of play the melody of it a little bit for you tonight, but man, you can sing along. That'd be wonderful. And Sweet By and By, one of the most beloved hymns of all time. The lyrics were written by S. Fillmore Bennett. How would you like to have that name? And the music was by Joseph P. Webster. And Mr. Bennett was a storekeeper, as it turns out, back in the 18-somethings. And he describes the composition of the hymn in his autobiography, and listen to what he says. He said, Mr. Webster, like many musicians, that's the other author, was of an exceeding nervous and sensitive nature and subject to periods of depression. Now stop there for just a minute. Who would have thought that someone suffering depression would write a song like Sweet By and By? Well, there's a story to that. And one day he wandered into the shop there at Mr. Bennett's shop, and he was kind of just looking down at the ground. He was despondent and that kind of thing. And Mr. Bennett says, I learned this man's peculiarities so well that on meeting him I could tell at a glance if he was melancholy, and had found that I could rouse him up by giving him a new song to work on. He came into my place of business, that was in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, by the way, walked down to the stove and turned his back to me without speaking. I was at my desk. Turning to him, I said, Mr. Webster, what is the matter now? It's no matter, he replied. It will be all right by and by. In a state of depression, he said that. And then the idea of the hymn, Mr. Bennett says, came to me like a fresh ray of sunlight, and I replied in the sweet by and by. Why would not that make a good hymn, sir? Maybe it would work, he said, kind of indifferently. Turning to my desk, I penned the words of the hymn as fast as I could write. I handed the words to Mr. Webster, and as he read, his eyes kindled, and stepping to the desk, he began to write down the musical notes. Of all things in my mind to write a hymn like this on, he took out his violin, he played the melody, and then jotted down the notes of the chorus. It was not over 30 minutes from the time I took my pen, Mr. Bennett said, to write the words, before the two friends, with Webster and myself, were singing the song in the sweet by and by. And I want to tell you that I chose this particular song to try to play it on the dulcimer because a good friend of mine lives right here in Washington County. His name's Keith Powers. He's a dulcimer builder and a dulcimer player. And I discovered Keith at one time through a newspaper article that my mom had showed me that was in the Bristol paper. And it was talking about how Keith had built his first dulcimer like 40 years ago, and finally he got retired and had enough time to build his second dulcimer. Now he's built several, and I go down to visit him from time to time. And I was telling him one time, I said, Keith, I'm really struggling to try to learn melodies and things, and I don't understand rhythm, and I'm not a musician and all these things. And he said, look, he said, if you're going to use this instrument in church, he says, I'm going to educate you to something. He said, a wise man once said, It's as if God made hymns for the dulcimer, or perhaps God made dulcimer for old hymns. And so I really started to apply that in my life as I was trying to learn. And I tell you, when you think about Sweet By and By, you know, the writers of this old hymn are there now, aren't they? And may I say to you that Mr. Webster's not depressed anymore, is he? He knows the Lord. And we're going to be there even before we know it. Because I can tell you from personal experience, my mother went to heaven February 27th, just a couple of months ago, and you know, she didn't know how long she was going to have to not feel well and not have to wait. And just as peaceful as could be, she closed her eyes and she ended up on the other side. So if you've got loved ones over there, I want you to think about them when you think about these words. Read them, sing them, or whatever. But folks, I'm going to tell you, it's not going to be long at all that if you know Christ, that we're going to be there in a sweet by and by.
I tell you, that's beautiful. That right there is just beautiful. I tell you, when you said the hymns are made for the dulcimer, dulcimer made for hymns, I know what it is. For that song it was. That's just tremendous right there. I tell you what,